George Matthews knew something was wrong when his psychiatrist suggested a, quote, minor brain procedure after just 3 appointments. The 68-year-old former principal had a perfect memory, but his family was convincing Dr. Blackwood he was losing his mind. What they didn't know was that George had been secretly recording every conversation for 2 months. This is the story of how a retired educator outsmarted a medical conspiracy designed to steal his independence, his money, and nearly his life. By the time George was finished, 3 people were in federal prison, and he'd exposed the largest elder abuse scandal in Arkansas history. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. You'll want to hear every detail of how George turned the tables on everyone who underestimated him. George Matthews had lived independently in his Springdale, Arkansas home for 15 years after his wife Margaret died. At 68, he maintained his own workshop, balanced his checkbook to the penny, and could recite historical dates from memory, thanks to his 40-year career as a high school principal and history teacher. He had $1.8 million in retirement savings, a paid-off house worth $400,000, and no debt. More importantly, he had his wits about him, sharp, analytical, and suspicious of people who treated him like he was fragile. Which is why the sudden concern from his son David felt strange. David Matthews was 45 years old, worked as a real estate agent in Fayetteville, and had been financially struggling for years. His wife Jennifer was a licensed practical nurse who worked part-time at various medical facilities. They had 2 teenage children and a mortgage they could barely afford. "Dad, we're worried about you living alone," David said during a Sunday dinner in March 2024. "You're getting older, and what if something happens?" "I'm fine, David. I take care of myself just like I have for 15 years. "But what about your memory? Last week you forgot we were coming for dinner." George frowned. He remembered that dinner perfectly. David had called at the last minute to change the time, and he had prepared accordingly. But when he mentioned this, Jennifer spoke up. "Mr. Matthews, sometimes memory issues start gradually. David told me you've been repeating stories lately." "What stories?" "You know, the same anecdotes about your teaching days. Sometimes you tell us the same story twice in one conversation." George was certain this wasn't true, but David and Jennifer exchanged concerned looks that made him question himself. Was he becoming forgetful? Was he repeating himself without realizing it? "Maybe we should have a doctor check you out," David suggested, "just to be safe." Against his better judgment, George agreed to a medical evaluation. David recommended Dr. Marcus Blackwood, a psychiatrist his wife Jennifer knew from her nursing work. "Dr. Blackwood specializes in geriatric mental health," Jennifer explained. "He's very understanding with older patients." The first appointment with Dr. Blackwood felt wrong from the moment George walked into his office. The psychiatrist was a thin, nervous man in his early 50s, who seemed more interested in taking notes than listening to his answers. "Mr. Matthews, your family is concerned about memory issues," Dr. Blackwood said, barely looking up from his notepad. "Can you tell me what year it is?" 2024. "And who is the current president?" "Joe Biden." "Can you count backward from 100 by 7s? George rattled off the sequence flawlessly. 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65. "That's fine," Dr. Blackwood interrupted, making more notes. "Your son mentioned you've been having difficulty managing finances." "I haven't had any difficulty. I balance my checkbook every month and handle all my investments myself." "Sometimes patients aren't aware of their limitations," Dr. Blackwood said dismissively. "Family members often notice problems before patients do." The appointment lasted 20 minutes. Dr. Blackwood prescribed a mild anti-anxiety medication, quote, "to help with the stress of aging," and scheduled a follow-up appointment for the next week. Walking to his car, George felt unsettled. Nothing about the appointment had addressed his actual mental state. Dr. Blackwood seemed to have predetermined conclusions about his condition based on what David and Jennifer had told him. That evening, he called his best friend Robert Wilson, another retired educator who lived 2 streets away. "Robert, do I seem forgetful to you? Do I repeat stories?" "George, you have the sharpest memory of anyone I know. You remember dates, names, details from decades ago. Why are you asking?" "David thinks I might be developing dementia." "David's been broke for years and you're sitting on nearly $2 million. I'd be suspicious if I were you. Robert's blunt assessment crystallized George's growing unease. His son's sudden concern about his mental health coincided perfectly with his ongoing financial problems. The second appointment with Dr. Blackwood was even more troubling. The psychiatrist had prepared a series of cognitive tests that seemed designed to confuse rather than evaluate. Mr. Matthews, I'm going to give you 3 words to remember: apple, penny, table. Can you repeat them back? Apple, penny, table. Good. Now I want you to draw a clock showing 3:15. George drew a perfect clock with the hands positioned correctly. I see some irregularities in your clock drawing, Dr. Blackwood said, making notes. The spacing between numbers shows some cognitive decline. The spacing looks fine to me. Patients often don't recognize their own deficits. It's part of the condition. After a series of similar tests, Dr. Blackwood asked him to recall the 3 words from earlier. Apple, penny, table. You said apple, penny, stable. No, I said table. I have it written down here as stable. Memory revision is another symptom we need to monitor. George knew he had said, quote, table, not stable. Dr. Blackwood was deliberately misrecording his answers to create evidence of cognitive impairment. Mr. Matthews, I'm recommending increased monitoring of your daily activities. Perhaps your family should take a more active role in managing your finances and medical decisions. I don't need anyone managing my finances. The tests suggest otherwise. I'm going to discuss care options with your son. Leaving the appointment, George felt like he was being gaslit. His answers were being twisted, his competence was being questioned, and Dr. Blackwood seemed more interested in supporting a predetermined narrative than conducting a legitimate evaluation. That night, he made a decision that would save his life. He would start recording every interaction with Dr. Blackwood and his family. Using his smartphone, a skill he'd learned to stay connected with former students, George began documenting the conspiracy against him. The recordings he captured over the next 2 months would eventually send 3 people to federal prison. The third appointment revealed the true scope of the scheme. Mr. Matthews, your condition is progressing faster than I initially hoped, Dr. Blackwood said. The family has expressed concerns about your ability to live independently. What specific concerns? Financial mismanagement, forgetting to take medications, confusion about dates and appointments. None of these issues actually existed, but George played along while his phone recorded everything. What do you recommend? There are several treatment options: medication, supervised living arrangements, and in some cases, minor surgical interventions that can help with aggressive symptoms. Surgical interventions? Modern psychiatric procedures have advanced significantly. A small procedure can reduce agitation and confusion, making patients much more manageable. George felt his blood run cold. Dr. Blackwood was suggesting a lobotomy, a procedure that would destroy his personality and cognitive abilities while leaving him physically alive but mentally incapacitated. I'd like to think about this. Of course, I'll schedule a consultation with a specialist for next week. Dr. Harrison is an expert in these procedures. Driving home, George realized the full horror of what was being planned. His family wanted him declared mentally incompetent so they could control his assets. Dr. Blackwood was falsifying records to support that diagnosis. And now they were planning a surgical procedure that would permanently incapacitate him. But they had underestimated the man who had spent 40 years managing difficult teenagers and suspicious parents. George's first step was to get an independent medical evaluation. Without telling David or Jennifer, he made an appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, a geriatrician at Northwest Arkansas Medical Center with no connection to Dr. Blackwood. Mr. Matthews, I want to conduct a comprehensive cognitive assessment, Dr. Chen explained. This will include memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and a review of your medical history. The evaluation took 2 hours. Dr. Chen tested George's short-term memory, long-term recall, spatial reasoning, language skills, and executive function. Every test came back normal for his age group. Mr. Matthews, your cognitive function is excellent, Dr. Chen concluded. You score in the 95th percentile for men your age. There's no evidence of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other cognitive impairment. Would you be willing to put that assessment in writing? Absolutely. May I ask why you're concerned about a second opinion? George explained about Dr. Blackwood's diagnosis and the recommended surgical intervention. Dr. Chen's expression darkened. Mr. Matthews, what you're describing sounds like medical fraud. No legitimate psychiatrist would recommend brain surgery based on the symptoms you've described, especially without comprehensive testing. What should I do? Document everything, get copies of all medical records, and consider contacting the Arkansas State Medical Board. Armed with Dr. Chen's written assessment, George began building his case. He requested copies of all records from Dr. Blackwood's office, citing his right to access his own medical files. The records revealed the extent of the falsification. Dr. Blackwood had documented cognitive impairments that didn't exist, recorded test answers that were incorrect, and written progress notes describing symptoms George had never exhibited. According to his files, George was increasingly confused and agitated, unable to manage basic financial decisions, and, quote, showing signs of aggressive behavior toward family members. None of these characterizations were true, but they built a medical case for declaring him incompetent. Most damning was a note from Jennifer Matthews. Patient's family reports escalating memory loss, financial confusion, and hostile behavior. Recommend immediate intervention before patient becomes danger to himself or others. Jennifer was providing false information to support the fraud, using her medical credentials to lend credibility to the lies. But George's recorded conversations would prove that every claim in his medical file was fabricated. 2 weeks before the scheduled consultation with the surgical specialist, David and Jennifer invited George to dinner to discuss his care options. He accepted, bringing his recording device hidden in his jacket pocket. "Dad, Dr. Blackwood thinks you need more structured care," David began. "Your condition is getting worse." "I feel fine." "That's part of the problem," Jennifer interjected. "Patients with dementia often don't realize how impaired they've become." "The doctor thinks you should consider moving to a memory care facility," David continued. "Somewhere with professional supervision." "I don't want to move." "It might not be up to you much longer," Jennifer said bluntly. "Dr. Blackwood is recommending a court evaluation to determine if you're competent to make your own decisions." "What does that mean?" "It means a judge would appoint someone to make decisions for you," David explained, "about your living situation, your finances, your medical care." "And who would that someone be?" "Well, as your son, I'd be the logical choice. I understand your needs, and Jennifer has medical experience." The conversation continued for another hour, with David and Jennifer outlining their plans to control every aspect of George's life. They discussed selling his house, moving his investments to accounts they could manage, and authorizing medical treatments he might resist. "Dr. Harrison thinks the procedure could really help with Dad's agitation," Jennifer said at one point. "He'd be much calmer afterward, easier to manage." "What exactly is this procedure?" George asked. "It's a minor brain surgery," David explained. "They make small adjustments to reduce aggressive impulses and confusion. You'd still be yourself, just more peaceful." George realized they were planning to lobotomize him to make him easier to manage while they stole his life savings. The recordings he was capturing would prove that his son and daughter-in-law were willing to destroy his mind for money. But the conspiracy went deeper than family greed. Through his research, George discovered that Dr. Blackwood was part of a larger elder abuse network operating across northwest Arkansas. He was falsifying diagnoses for families who wanted to gain control of elderly relatives, assets, receiving kickbacks from nursing facilities, and referring patients for unnecessary procedures. Dr. Harrison, the specialist who had performed the lobotomy, had a history of disciplinary actions in other states for performing unauthorized procedures on elderly patients. He had moved to Arkansas after losing his license in Colorado for similar practices. Jennifer's role was crucial to the scheme. As a licensed nurse, she could provide credible medical observations to support Dr. Blackwood's false diagnosis. Her statements about George's condition carried professional weight that ordinary family members couldn't provide. The network had been operating for at least 3 years, targeting elderly people with substantial assets but limited family oversight. George's case was just one of dozens they were processing simultaneously. But unlike their previous victims, George had been documenting everything. He contacted the Arkansas Attorney General's office and spoke with Assistant Attorney General Maria Rodriguez, who specialized in elder abuse cases. "Mr. Matthews, what you're describing is a criminal conspiracy," Rodriguez said after reviewing George's evidence. "We've been investigating Dr. Blackwood for months, but we needed someone on the inside to gather evidence. What happens now?" We're going to set up a controlled operation. You'll keep your consultation appointment with Dr. Harrison, but you'll be wearing a wire. We need to capture them discussing the surgical procedure and the financial arrangements. George agreed to become an undercover operative in his own case. At 68 years old, he was about to take down a criminal network that had been exploiting elderly people across Arkansas. The consultation with Dr. Harrison was scheduled for a Thursday morning at his private clinic in Rogers, Arkansas. George arrived wearing a sophisticated recording device provided by the FBI, which had joined the investigation due to the interstate nature of the medical fraud. Dr. Harrison was a heavy-set man in his 60s with soft hands and cold eyes. His office was expensively decorated but felt sterile and unwelcoming. "Mr. Matthews, Dr. Blackwood has briefed me on your condition," Dr. Harrison began. "He's recommended a bilateral cingulotomy to address your behavioral issues." "What does that involve?" "We make small lesions in specific brain areas that control emotional regulation and impulse control. It's a relatively simple procedure that can dramatically improve quality of life for both patients and their families." "Are there risks?" "Minor ones. Some patients experience personality changes, but most families find these changes beneficial. The patient becomes much more compliant and manageable." Dr. Harrison was describing a procedure that would fundamentally alter George's personality and cognitive abilities. He was selling it as beneficial because it would make him compliant and manageable for his family. "What about consent? Do I have to agree to the surgery?" "Well, that's complicated. Dr. Blackwood will be recommending to the court that you lack the capacity to make medical decisions. Once a guardian is appointed, they can consent to necessary treatment on your behalf." "And who determines what's necessary?" "The medical team, in consultation with the family. We always prioritize what's best for the patient, even if the patient doesn't initially understand the benefits." The conversation continued with Dr. Harrison explaining the financial arrangements. The procedure would cost $75,000, not covered by insurance because it was considered elective. However, the family could use the patient's assets to pay for it once guardianship was established. "Your son mentioned you have substantial retirement savings," Dr. Harrison said. "This would be an appropriate use of those funds to ensure your long-term care." Everything was being recorded. Dr. Harrison was admitting that he would perform unauthorized brain surgery on a competent patient, using his own money to pay for it, after his family gained illegal control of his assets. But the most damning revelation came at the end of the appointment. "Mr. Matthews, I should mention that Dr. Blackwood and I have a referral arrangement," Dr. Harrison said casually. "He receives a consultation fee for each patient he refers to me. It's a standard professional courtesy in our field." Dr. Blackwood was receiving kickbacks for referring patients for unnecessary surgery. The entire scheme was designed to generate revenue by convincing families to authorize procedures that would permanently incapacitate their elderly relatives. George left the appointment with enough evidence to destroy the entire network. The FBI raid on Dr. Blackwood's office occurred on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week before George's scheduled court hearing to determine his competency. Agents seized patient files, financial records, and computer systems containing evidence of systematic fraud. Dr. Harrison's clinic was raided simultaneously, with agents discovering patient records documenting dozens of unauthorized procedures performed on elderly patients whose families had gained guardianship through fraudulent medical evaluations. David and Jennifer Matthews were arrested at their home that same morning, charged with conspiracy to commit elder abuse, medical fraud, and attempted theft of property belonging to a vulnerable adult. The evidence against them was overwhelming. George's recordings captured them discussing the scheme in detail, including their plans to control his assets after the lobotomy made him easier to manage. But the arrests were just the beginning of George's victory. The investigation revealed that Dr. Blackwood had falsified medical records for 47 elderly patients over 3 years, helping families gain control of more than $23 million in assets. Dr. Harrison had performed 31 unauthorized procedures on patients who had been declared incompetent through fraudulent evaluations. George's case became the keystone that brought down the entire network. His meticulous documentation and willingness to work undercover provided prosecutors with evidence they needed to file federal charges. "Mr. Matthews, you've helped us expose the largest elder abuse conspiracy in Arkansas history," FBI agent Johnson told him after the arrests. "Your courage saved not just yourself, but dozens of other elderly people who were being targeted." But the legal victory was only part of George's satisfaction. The trials of Dr. Blackwood, Dr. Harrison, David Matthews, and Jennifer Matthews began 8 months after their arrests. George testified in each case, playing recordings that demonstrated the conspiracy in their own words. Dr. Blackwood's trial revealed the systematic nature of his fraud. Medical experts testified that his diagnostic procedures were designed to create false evidence of cognitive impairment. His financial records showed payments from nursing facilities and surgical providers who benefited from his referrals. Dr. Blackwood perverted his medical training to exploit vulnerable elderly patients, prosecutor Maria Rodriguez argued. He used his professional credentials to legitimize theft and abuse on an unprecedented scale. Dr. Blackwood was convicted on 23 federal counts of medical fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. He received a 15-year federal prison sentence and lost his medical license permanently. Dr. Harrison's trial focused on the unauthorized procedures he performed. Medical experts testified that bilateral cingulotomy was an experimental procedure with no proven benefits for the conditions he claimed to treat. Dr. Harrison was performing lobotomies on elderly patients to make them easier for families to control, Rodriguez explained to the jury. He was permanently disabling people for money. Dr. Harrison received a 12-year sentence and was ordered to pay restitution to the families of patients he had harmed. David and Jennifer Matthews faced charges specific to their conspiracy against George. The recordings captured them planning to steal his assets and authorizing surgery that would destroy his cognitive abilities. These defendants were willing to lobotomize a family member for inheritance money, Rodriguez argued. They represent the worst kind of elder abuse, exploitation by trusted family members. David received 8 years in federal prison. Jennifer, despite her medical training, received 10 years because her professional credentials made her betrayal more egregious. But George's satisfaction came from more than criminal convictions. The civil lawsuits against the conspiracy members resulted in significant financial compensation for George and other victims. Dr. Blackwood's malpractice insurance paid $2.3 million to settle claims related to his fraudulent diagnoses. Dr. Harrison's assets, including his clinic and personal property, were liquidated to pay restitution to surgical victims. George received $1.1 million from the settlement. David and Jennifer's assets were seized to compensate George for their attempted theft. Their house, cars, and savings accounts were forfeited, totaling $340,000. The nursing facilities and medical companies that paid kickbacks to Dr. Blackwood faced separate lawsuits and regulatory penalties. Several facilities lost their licenses, and multiple executives faced criminal charges. Mr. Matthews, you've not only recovered your own assets, but you've created a compensation fund for other victims, his attorney explained. Your courage created justice for dozens of families. But the financial settlements were less important to George than the systemic changes his case inspired. George's case led to comprehensive reforms in Arkansas elder care and medical oversight. The George Matthews Protection Act was passed by the state legislature, requiring independent medical evaluations for any competency determination and mandating recording of all geriatric psychiatric consultations. The Arkansas State Medical Board implemented new procedures for investigating suspected elder abuse and established a dedicated hotline for reporting suspicious medical practices. Federal authorities used George's case as a model for investigating similar networks in other states. The FBI created a specialized elder abuse task force that has identified and prosecuted medical fraud schemes across the country. George Matthews exposed a form of abuse that was hiding in plain sight, said Dr. Rachel Green, director of the Arkansas Elder Protection Agency. His case showed how medical credentials could be weaponized against vulnerable populations. But George's most important victory was personal. At 69 years old, George Matthews was now a nationally recognized advocate for elder rights. He spoke at medical conferences, testified before congressional committees, and consulted with law enforcement agencies investigating similar cases. The most important lesson from my experience is that age doesn't make you helpless, she told a gathering of elder rights advocates, but it requires vigilance, documentation, and the courage to fight back when people underestimate you. Georgie's cognitive abilities remained sharp and her independence intact. She continued living in her own home, managing her investments, and pursuing new interests, including digital forensics and elder law. The $3.8 million she recovered from the various settlements was donated to establish the Matthews Foundation for Elder Protection, which funds legal advocacy for elderly people facing abuse from family members or medical professionals. I didn't need the money, Georgie explained, but other elderly people need protection from the kind of conspiracy I survived. Margaret Wilson, her friend who had first suggested suspicion about David's motives, became co-director of the foundation. Georgie proved that the best defense against elder abuse is elder empowerment, Margaret said. When older people are informed, connected, and willing to fight back, these conspiracies fall apart. The investigation sparked by Georgie's case uncovered elder abuse networks in 12 states. Federal authorities discovered that Dr. Blackwood and Dr. Harrison were part of a nationwide conspiracy involving dozens of medical professionals who specialized in fraudulent competency evaluations. The network operated by targeting elderly people with substantial assets but limited family oversight. Medical professionals would fabricate diagnoses, families would gain guardianship, and surgical providers would perform unnecessary procedures to make patients manageable while assets were transferred. Georgie Matthews broke open a criminal enterprise that had been operating across the country for years, explained FBI Director William Hayes during a press conference about the nationwide arrests. Her courage and intelligence prevented dozens of other elderly people from becoming victims. The investigation led to 73 federal indictments, $47 million in asset seizures, and the closure of 23 medical facilities involved in the conspiracy. More than 200 elderly victims were identified, with many receiving financial compensation and restored legal autonomy. But the scope of the network revealed how vulnerable elderly people could be when family members and medical professionals conspired against them. The Georgie Matthews case taught us that elder abuse isn't just individual exploitation, explained Dr. Lisa Chen, a geriatrician who testified in multiple trials. It can be systematic, professional, and extremely sophisticated. We needed equally sophisticated responses to combat it. The medical community implemented new safeguards, including mandatory second opinions for competency evaluations, independent patient advocates for elderly people facing guardianship proceedings, and enhanced oversight of geriatric psychiatric facilities. 3 years after exposing the conspiracy, Georgie Matthews had become a symbol of elder empowerment and resistance. At 71, she remained actively involved in elder advocacy while pursuing new interests, including teaching digital security to senior citizens. People assume that being elderly makes you vulnerable, Georgie said during a recent interview. But experience, education, and determination are powerful tools that don't diminish with age. The Matthews Foundation for Elder Protection had helped more than 400 elderly people fight various forms of abuse, from financial exploitation by family members to medical fraud by healthcare providers. The Foundation's legal advocacy program had recovered more than $12 million in stolen assets and prevented dozens of inappropriate guardianship proceedings. Georgie's story had been featured in medical journals, law enforcement publications, and elder advocacy materials. Her case was studied in medical schools as an example of how professional credentials could be misused and how patient vigilance could prevent abuse. But perhaps her most important contribution was demonstrating that elderly people could be effective advocates for themselves and others. The conspiracy against me failed because they underestimated my ability to fight back, Georgie reflected. They saw an elderly woman and assumed I would be passive and compliant. They forgot that I had spent 40 years dealing with difficult teenagers, manipulative parents, and bureaucratic administrators. I knew how to recognize deception and how to gather evidence. Her son David and daughter-in-law Jennifer remained in federal prison, their earliest possible release still years away. They had lost their home, their careers, and their children, who now lived with Jennifer's parents in Oklahoma. I don't take pleasure in their punishment, Georgie said, but I have no regrets about exposing their crimes. They were willing to destroy my mind for money. That's unforgivable. Dr. Blackwood died in federal prison during his second year of incarceration, reportedly from a heart attack. Dr. Harrison remained imprisoned, his appeals having been exhausted. The medical facility where Jennifer had worked implemented new protocols for reporting suspected elder abuse, and the Arkansas Nursing Board created mandatory training programs to help healthcare workers recognize and prevent exploitation of elderly patients. 6 months after the final convictions, George received an unexpected call from Detective Inspector Sarah Bradley of the London Metropolitan Police. The investigation into Dr. Blackwood's network had uncovered international connections that authorities were still unraveling. Mr. Matthews, we've discovered that your case was part of something much larger than we initially realized. Detective Inspector Bradley explained during a video call. Dr. Blackwood was corresponding with medical professionals in the UK, Canada, and Australia who were operating similar schemes. The international investigation revealed that elder abuse through fraudulent medical diagnoses was a global phenomenon. Medical professionals in multiple countries were sharing techniques for manipulating competency evaluations, falsifying psychiatric records, and coordinating with families to gain control of elderly people's assets. They had developed a sophisticated playbook, Bradley continued. Standard procedures for targeting elderly people, template diagnosis reports, and even training materials for family members on how to convince doctors their relatives were incompetent. George's detailed documentation had become the template for investigating these international networks. His recording techniques, evidence-gathering methods, and legal strategies were being adapted by law enforcement agencies worldwide. Your case broke the code, Mr. Matthews. Every investigation since then has used your approach as the foundation. The international scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Authorities had identified similar schemes in 27 countries, involving more than 400 medical professionals and targeting thousands of elderly victims. The estimated financial losses exceeded $200 million worldwide. But the revelation that disturbed George most was the discovery of success rates in the conspirators' communications. They were tracking statistics, Bradley explained. Success rates for different types of families, most effective diagnostic approaches, optimal timing for surgical interventions. They had turned elder abuse into a data-driven industry. Dr. Blackwood's communications revealed that he considered George's case a learning opportunity because he had initially appeared to be an ideal target, elderly, wealthy, with limited family support. His resistance had prompted the network to develop new strategies for dealing with difficult patients. They were studying you, Mr. Matthews. Your case became a training scenario for other conspirators. This revelation transformed George's understanding of what he had faced. He hadn't just been the victim of a family conspiracy. He had been a test case for an international criminal organization. How many other people went through what I experienced? He asked. Based on our investigation, we estimate more than 3,000 elderly people worldwide were targeted using similar methods. You were one of the few who fought back successfully. The international investigation led to coordinated arrests across multiple countries. Interpol issued arrest warrants for 73 individuals involved in elder abuse networks, and several countries implemented new laws specifically targeting medical fraud against elderly populations. George agreed to testify at international conferences and assist with training programs for law enforcement agencies investigating elder abuse. His experience had become a case study in how individual resistance could expose systematic corruption. Mr. Matthews, you didn't just save yourself. Detective Inspector Bradley concluded, you exposed a criminal industry that was operating on every continent. As news of George's success spread through elder advocacy networks, he began receiving calls from elderly people across the country who suspected they were facing similar conspiracies. The Matthews Foundation developed a rapid response protocol to help potential victims document suspicious medical evaluations and family behavior. The first major copycat case came from Phoenix, Arizona, where 74-year-old retired engineer Frank Rodriguez contacted the foundation after his daughter-in-law began pressuring him to see a psychiatrist about memory problems he didn't have. Mr. Matthews, I read about your case online, Frank explained during their phone conversation. My situation sounds exactly like yours. My son's wife is a medical technician, and she's been telling a Dr. Peterson that I'm becoming confused and aggressive. George immediately recognized the pattern. Frank was wealthy, lived alone, and had family members with financial problems who were positioning themselves to gain control of his assets through fraudulent medical diagnoses. Frank, you need to start recording everything immediately, George advised, and get an independent medical evaluation before you see Dr. Peterson again. Working with the Foundation's legal team, Frank was able to document attempts by Dr. Peterson to falsify cognitive test results during their first appointment. The doctor's notes claimed Frank had failed memory tests that he had actually passed perfectly. Unlike George's case, Frank's family conspiracy was exposed before any surgical consultations were scheduled. Armed with George's playbook, he was able to gather evidence quickly and contact authorities before the scheme progressed. Mr. Matthews saved my life and my independence, Frank told reporters after his son and daughter-in-law were arrested. Without his example, I would have trusted the doctor and ended up like so many other victims. The Foundation identified 47 similar cases within 8 months, with elderly people using George's methods to expose medical fraud attempts before they progressed to dangerous surgical recommendations. The pattern was consistent: financially motivated family members, corrupt medical professionals, and elderly targets with substantial assets. But the case that affected George most personally involved a man whose situation mirrored his own experience almost exactly. Martin Chen, a 69-year-old retired professor from Portland, Oregon, contacted the foundation after discovering that his nephew and his wife had been meeting with a psychiatrist to discuss his declining mental condition. Like George, Martin was highly educated, financially independent, and had no actual cognitive impairments. "They're using the exact same script your family used," Martin told George during their first conversation. "The same concerned expressions, the same fake examples of memory problems, even the same phrases about getting help before it's too late." Martin's nephew had gambling debts, his wife worked in healthcare, and they were targeting Martin's $2.1 million retirement savings. The psychiatrist they had chosen, Dr. Amanda Foster, had previously worked in the same medical network as Dr. Blackwood before relocating to Oregon. "This is personal," George realized. "They're targeting people like us specifically because they think retired educators will be compliant with medical authority." Working closely with Martin, George helped coordinate an FBI investigation that revealed Dr. Foster was operating a smaller version of Dr. Blackwood's network. The Portland case led to additional arrests and exposed connections to the original Arkansas conspiracy that authorities had missed. George Matthews didn't just expose one conspiracy, FBI agent Johnson explained. He created a blueprint for recognition and resistance that has prevented dozens of other elderly people from becoming victims. The Foundation's work had evolved beyond individual case assistance to systematic prevention. George began speaking at senior centers, retirement communities, and elder advocacy organizations, teaching elderly people to recognize early warning signs of medical fraud conspiracies. "The most important thing I learned is that these conspiracies rely on our compliance," George explained during his presentations. "They assume we'll trust medical authority and family members automatically. But trust must be earned, and verification is always appropriate." As George's advocacy work expanded, he embraced new technologies and education initiatives to help elderly people protect themselves from exploitation. Working with digital security experts, the Matthews Foundation developed smartphone apps specifically designed for seniors to document suspicious medical evaluations and family interactions. "The same technology that makes us vulnerable to scams can also protect us from abuse," George explained during a presentation at the Consumer Electronics Show. "We just need to learn how to use it effectively." The ElderShield app, developed by the Foundation, allowed users to discreetly record conversations, automatically back up evidence to secure cloud storage, and instantly alert trusted contacts if they felt threatened. The app included tutorials specifically designed for seniors who weren't comfortable with complex technology. "Mr. Matthews, you're revolutionizing elder protection," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a Geron technology researcher who collaborated on the app development. "You're showing that older adults can be early adopters when the technology serves their safety needs." George's technological advocacy attracted attention from major tech companies interested in developing senior-focused safety applications. He consulted with Apple, Google, and Microsoft on designing interfaces that elderly users could navigate easily while maintaining sophisticated security features. But George's most ambitious project was developing a comprehensive education program that would teach elderly people to become advocates for themselves and others facing exploitation. 3 years after exposing the medical conspiracy, he established the Academy of Elder Empowerment in partnership with the University of Arkansas. The Academy offered courses specifically designed for seniors who wanted to learn advocacy skills, legal knowledge, and technological tools to protect themselves and others from abuse. Students ranged in age from 60 to 89, representing diverse backgrounds but sharing common experiences with attempted exploitation. "We're not just training people to avoid becoming victims," George explained during the Academy's opening ceremony. "We're training them to become advocates who can help other elderly people fight back against exploitation." The Foundation partnered with the FBI's Cybercrime Division to train elderly people to recognize and resist digital exploitation attempts. George became one of the first senior citizens to receive advanced cybersecurity training, learning techniques used by federal agents to protect sensitive information. "At 72, I'm learning skills that some 30-year-olds don't have," George said with pride. "Age is only a limitation if you accept it as one." The Academy's graduates became leaders in elder advocacy organizations across the country. They established local chapters of the Matthews Foundation, lobbied for stronger elder protection laws, and provided direct assistance to elderly people facing exploitation. We're creating a network of empowered elders who understand that age brings wisdom, not just vulnerability, George said during the Academy's first graduation ceremony. The program's success led to expansion opportunities. The Department of Health and Human Services provided federal funding to establish Academy programs in 15 states, and international organizations invited George to develop similar curricula for other countries. The Foundation's technology initiatives had protected more than 200 elderly people from various forms of digital exploitation within 2 years. The Academy had graduated more than 400 advocates in its first 2 years, with graduates helping to expose 15 major elder abuse schemes and recover more than $5 million in stolen assets. George Matthews has redefined what it means to age gracefully, said Dr. Maria Santos, director of the International Alliance for Elder Protection. He's shown that growing older can mean growing stronger, not just growing more vulnerable. But the Academy's most important achievement was changing how society viewed elderly people's capacity for advocacy and resistance. Before George Matthews, elder protection was something we did for elderly people, explained Senator Patricia Williams during hearings on elder abuse prevention. After George Matthews, elder protection became something elderly people could do for themselves and each other. Today, at 74 years old, George Matthews continues to live independently in his Springdale home, surrounded by the technology tools, legal knowledge, and advocacy networks he has spent years developing. His greatest achievement isn't the criminal convictions or financial recoveries his case inspired. It's proving that growing older can mean growing more powerful, not less. The conspiracy that targeted George was designed to exploit what society views as the inevitable vulnerability of aging. His attackers assumed that being elderly meant being confused, compliant, and grateful for others' intervention. Instead, they encountered a man whose decades of experience had prepared him to recognize deception, gather evidence, and fight back with strategies they never anticipated. They thought my age made me weak, George reflects. Instead, it made me experienced, determined, and absolutely unwilling to accept exploitation as inevitable. The Matthews Foundation has helped more than 1,800 elderly people resist various forms of abuse, recover more than $34 million in stolen assets, and maintain their independence. The Academy of Elder Empowerment has trained advocates who are transforming elder protection from a passive service industry into an active resistance movement. The international impact of George's case continues to expand. Elder advocacy organizations in 31 countries have adopted the Matthews Protocol for investigating suspected abuse. Law enforcement agencies worldwide use his evidence-gathering techniques as training materials. George Matthews didn't just expose a conspiracy, said Dr. Lisa Chen, director of the World Health Organization's Elder Protection Initiative. He exposed the false assumption that aging equals vulnerability. His case proves that experience, education, and determination are forms of power that increase with age. The conspiracy against George Matthews failed because his attackers fundamentally misunderstood what it means to grow older. They saw gray hair and assumed cognitive decline. They saw retirement and assumed helplessness. They saw age and assumed compliance. Instead, they encountered wisdom earned through decades of experience, analytical skills honed through years of professional practice, and the moral clarity that comes with understanding what really matters. They thought being 68 years old made me their victim, George concluded. Instead, it made me their worst nightmare, someone with the knowledge, resources, and determination to fight back effectively. His final victory was proving that the assumptions society makes about elderly vulnerability are not just wrong, they're dangerous. When we treat aging as accumulated wisdom and experience, we create defenders uniquely qualified to protect themselves and others. The Matthews Foundation and the international elder advocacy movement George inspired continue to grow because they're built on a revolutionary principle. Growing older means growing stronger, not weaker. That's the principle's greatest lesson, and the most important message about aging with power instead of surrendering to assumptions about vulnerability. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Remember, wisdom and determination don't have expiration dates. They compound with age.